Hello and welcome to the British Sitcom History Podcast. My name is Alan, with me as always is Gareth.
Hello.
And today we are talking about Extras, the Ricky Gervais vehicle. Of course, he wrote it as well, with Steve Merchant. So the difficult second album to The Office, basically, is what this is. And we'll get into all that. As usual, we will be focusing on one specific episode and sort of going through that in detail and using that as to branch off and talk about the show in general. And this week we've gone for the last episode of Series 1, Patrick Stewart.
Yes.
Named after the celebrity guest.
You know, the reason why I thought we should do this episode is it's sort of a branch between Series 1 and Series 2. And as we'll go on to discuss, I think the two series are very different in tone and kind of in content as well.
Yes, I agree. I do think there's big differences between those series, and we'll get into that as well. But let's start with the basics here.
Yeah.
I'll tell you when Extras came out. So Series 1, it was 6 episodes. July to August 2005, followed by Series 2 a year later, September 2006, 6 episodes again, and then over a year later in Christmas 2007, they did that big finale, hour and a half special.
That's interesting, watching it again this week. Obviously, I remember the finale. I hadn't remembered it was a whole year later, and I remembered it as a Christmas special, but I didn't realise it was so much time passed between the two.
Yeah, I don't know why, particularly. They didn't just do it in 2006, but just... I think they do what they want, really, don't they? They like to take their time.
Well, that is an interesting way of putting it. I don't know if that was just a little slip of the tongue there, but they do what they want. That kind of summarises Ricky Gervais's television career.
Yeah,
for better or for worse.
Yeah, exactly.
And I think that's interesting. And so being serious, then they do what they want. So Extras clearly was, as you said, after The Office, and The Office had just been this huge success. Why don't we go back and have a little bit of a chat about, we're not going to cover The Office in detail, but I suppose it tells us a little bit about Gervais and Merchant and their background. Do you want to start there?
Well, maybe we need to go back to Gervais and Merchant, how they came about.
Yeah, let's do that.
As in general. So I think you're going to be the same here, but after the success of The Office, your main contact with Gervais and Merchant was on their XFM radio show.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, in which, with their producer Carl Pilkington, there is hours and hours and hours of material of them just sort of chatting to each other and having a bit of fun. And that's probably, certainly in terms of minutes of material, that's my main contact with these guys.
Yeah, I think so. And like a lot of comedy performers / radio presenters, there's a real skill in that, in basically just riffing for hours and having that sort of conversation. You think of like Adam and Joe, that sort of double act. It's not easy, and it's really hard to stay entertaining for that long. And that is something that Gervais and Merchant were very good at.
Yeah.
The question is, does that translate into scripted sitcom?
Well, interestingly, if you listen to the XFM radio shows, which are now all sort of available on YouTube and stuff like that, they're easy to find. So many things that are in those conversations you end up seeing in one of their shows.
Oh, definitely.
It's just,
there's a lot of Ricky Gervais material that comes out of Andy Millman's mouth.
Oh yeah. And that makes sense, they're obviously using that as a platform to, like you say, riff off each other, they're bouncing ideas off, and then they kind of go, oh, that worked. Oh, Carl Pilkington said something funny, I'll put that into the mouth of a character who's an idiot. And I think that's fair enough, that's a great way of, it seems like their writing style is sort of talking to each other and kind of doing character bits against each other and then seeing what works. But yeah, let me get into how they met a little bit. So, background of, let's do Ricky Gervais first. He was, he's brought up in Reading. And perhaps this is telling of how his personality. He is the fourth child of 4, but his 3 siblings are all sort of 10 to 15 years older than him.
Yeah.
He's not just the youngest child, but he was an accident, obviously, but as his mum told him. But perhaps that says something about his personality, about what you think about the youngest child. But basically, he was born in 1961, proper working class background, but ended up going to university in the early 80s, which is also where he met his partner, who he's still with now, Jane Fallon, who is endured him for 40 years.
Yeah.
So good on her.
Good showbiz relationship, that.
So and like, you know, there's all this classic footage of him in his new wave tight suits and his very chiseled jaw, trying to be David Bowie kind of singing.
And now it's over, but I feel colder. And now we're moving to new beginnings.
He was in a band, wasn't he? There's Shauna dancing. Yeah, there's some great photographs of him in that band, looking like a tubby new romantic.
He's not a tubby though at all. He's so skinny in that. Like,
that's projection, isn't it? That's me back projecting.
He's only 22 or whatever he is in that. But yeah, they had a couple of singles, but obviously it didn't really come to anything. But that was his first brush with, like, he obviously wants to be a performer. He wants to
be a pop star so much.
Yes, he does. But then, so what I know about him from, like, there's a big gap between sort of 1983 and 1998 in his kind of life story that I can't get to. But, you know, he was working as an events manager for University of London Union. He booked bands. There's a famous story that he was the manager of Suede before they became famous. Like, so he was obviously just in the music more than acting. He was in the music world. Mm-hmm. But then however this happened, he got a job as head of speech for XFM. So that was a London-based radio station. What head of speech is, I'm not entirely sure. I don't think he was either, judging from what he said about it.
Yeah, the story is that he got the job and didn't have a clue what he was doing, so he looked for a capable assistant.
Yeah, and that capable assistant was Stephen Merchant.
Yes.
Who is quite a bit younger. So Merchant was in 1974. So when he joined XFM, he was kind of straight out of uni. He'd done he studied film and literature at uni, but had got into the radio game there, like at the university radio station. So he wanted to do that as well. He was definitely thinking more in terms of radio. So that's how they met at that job, and they obviously clicked. They started bouncing off each other and et cetera, et cetera. They started doing things on the radio, and that quickly transferred into like little comedy bits, sketches. They started writing sketches together. I know certainly Stephen Merchant at this time was trying his hand at stand-up just around the circuit. And so they started writing sketches for things like The Sketch Show, which, you know, Lee Mack was in that, wasn't he?
Yeah, we've come across that before, I think.
And then perhaps most significantly, The 11 O'Clock Show.
So when did we talk? We've talked about the 11 o'clock show before, haven't we? Who was it we were talking about that with?
It must have been when we did the In-Betweeners, because
right.
Ian
Yes,
Morris and Damon Beasley were at Channel 4 at the time. They were involved in that. But so were so many people. It would seem to be such a nexus of comedic talent. And so I know, for example, all these guys worked on it, and Ricky Gervais, Stephen Merchant, Robin Ince, and Jimmy Carr did a show at the Edinburgh Fringe together in 2001.
Mm-hmm. When he was on the 11 o'clock show, he had this kind of obnoxious character, didn't he? So I presume that's what he was probably doing at Edinburgh.
Probably something along those lines. Oh, yeah, as you say, on the 11 o'clock show, Ricky Gervais was on air as well. He wasn't just a writer. They were writing sketches as well.
Actually, I just remembered something, right? I was at my school. Remember I was telling you about Mr. Morris, the PE teacher? Yeah. Right? He used to try and impress all the divs with stories, usually about sex, right? And he told us this, and we were meant to believe it. He said that when you're captured by cannibals, they show you pornographic pictures, so you get an erection and there's more meat. That's true, right? So you're in the pot, and the chief is adding a bit of salt and thumbing through a copy of Big and Bouncy, and you're going, oh, don't kill me, I don't want to die. Look at the mutton shutters on that. Throwing your plate right into their hands. More meat.
Yeah, thanks so much, Gervais. As usual, nothing to do with anything.
But yeah, he obviously enjoys that sort of the grotesquerie of all that. But, you know, other people... Mackenzie Crook was a regular on the 11 o'clock show, for example. Also, obviously, Mackenzie Crook went on to be in The Office. They also wrote sketches for Bruiser, which I don't know if you remember Bruiser as a sketch show.
Oh, go on, tell me about Bruiser. I don't remember Bruiser.
Well, it was a sketch show, but it brought together quite a few up-and-coming talents at that time. So Martin Freeman was one of them. Obviously, he a couple of years later was in The Office. Olivia Colman and Matthew Holness are both in it, who both turn up in The Office. Okay. Mitchell and Webb were in it before they got their own show. But yeah, so let's... how did they jump from being these kind of, you know, working sketch writers to being the the people who changed comedy forever. During this time, Ricky Gervais was obviously getting some notice, the 11 o'clock show thing. And off the back of that, he got the Ricky Gervais show, which was a chat show format in which he interviewed people, mostly people who he remembered from his childhood, from what I could tell. Like Peter Purvis, Jimmy Savile.
And was that the same character of obnoxious Ricky Gervais?
A little bit, not quite. I don't think he quite turned it up as much because he had to actually have a dialogue with people. But yeah, it is him being he's being the Ricky Gervais character, yeah.
Yeah.
And during this time, other things were going on. So Stephen Merchant went to do a production course at the BBC, because that's what he wanted to do. And basically as part of that, he had to make a short film. And so what he made was this little short about, a boss in the office who's a bit kooky, a bit gross. And it was based on this character that Ricky Gervais kind of played sometimes. You know, it was just one of his comedy bits that he would do, a bit of a characterization. And so they did that. That got shown to somebody liked it to the point where they were like, okay, you know what, there's a pilot here, let's do a pilot. And their producer, Ash Atala, was involved in that somehow, I'm not quite sure. But that got them a pilot, which they shot, and, that was a much more complete thing, like Martin Freeman and Lucy Davis are both in the pilot, Mackenzie Crook's in the pilot, it's kind of all there.
Okay.
And that led to the first series of The Office.
And David Brent was born.
But just before all that happened, there's a famous kind of another pilot they did called Golden Years. I'm sure you've heard of that.
I don't think I have. Go on.
So it was a Comedy Lab pilot, so Channel 4 again, I say, where they had some nice connections there. And Comedy Lab was a series that just did these like one-off little sitcom pilots, and some of them led to things.
I think I remember The Strand.
Yeah, that Peter Kay thing, that started as a Comedy Lab, for example.
Yeah, that's why I've heard of it, yeah.
And so their one was called Golden Years. It's about a boss of an office who wants to go on Stars in Their Eyes as David Bowie. So it's the ultimate nexus of Ricky Gervais material, really.
Yeah. Write what you know, Ricky.
If you watch it, it's easy to find out there. It's got so many elements of The Office in it, or at least of the David Brent character. Mm-hmm. But it's just turned up a little bit more onto the seedy side. He's just a little bit more sexual, predatory kind of, and a bit more dirty. But very, yeah. But a lot of the same elements going on there, and I think basically what happened with the Office, they'd already had this, they'd had time to hone this and work it out. See, okay, well that doesn't quite play. This is good. And so by the time they got to The Office, they've really come down onto this we're playing this real mockumentary style, and obviously that was a response to what was going on at the time in terms of reality TV, a lot of the fly on the wall documentaries, and making kind of stars out of these normal people, so to speak. So famously, The Office came out and it wasn't a huge success. It just sort of went out on BBC Two, but it got word of mouth. I mean, it got nominated for awards and things like that. Well, I think it won awards. Didn't it win Best New Comedy at the BAFTAs? Something like that.
So
yeah. So it was one of those things that didn't catch an audience, but people certainly in the know kind of went, "Oh, hello, that was interesting," and then it got a bit of word of mouth. So it got a second series, and by the time the second series came out, they'd repeated the first series. It had gained a bit of traction, and that's when it went huge. And then for whatever reason, even though it's such a British show, I think it really translated to an American audience as well, and that's when you've changed the world. When you break America. And obviously we see where Ricky Gervais and Stephen Merchant have gone to since then. I mean, they've obviously gone on to huge success and have managed to translate that for the best part of 20 years now. It wasn't a flash in the pan. They didn't just have a hit in America. They went and broke America.
They did. But let's bring ourselves back to the point here. So the first thing they did next in television was extras. And obviously the hook of extras are all these Hollywood celebrities that they could get on board. Clearly, people like Samuel L. Jackson, Kate Winslet, they must have been fans of The Office.
Yes, and from what I understand, the concept of that basically came from, a lot of celebrities, publicly would state, "Oh, I really like The Office, it's amazing." And so they were like, well, let's see if we can convert that into letting them come over and film for a day for, next to no money. So to jump into extras, one of my first complaints, I guess, about the celebrity guests is that when it's a massive celebrity guest like Samuel Jackson, it's so apparent that they were there for 3 hours, they filmed a cameo, and then the rest of the episode just goes on.
Yeah.
Whereas when it integrates the celebrity guest into the thing, Les Dennis, Ross Kemp, it just works so much better. It has so much more body.
I think you're right. And in that first series, there's a real different. Well, yeah. So there's 6 episodes, and 3 of the episodes: Ben Stiller, Kate Winslet, Samuel L. Jackson. Well, sorry, 4, because this one as well, Patrick Stewart. They're all big stars who, as you say, they come in for a couple of hours, film the scene, and then they disappear again. And it's great. It's really good. It's really sort of great novelty value. But they're not integral to the plot.
And I will say, actually, to be fair, Samuel L. Jackson, I mean, it is a cameo. But the others, Ben Stiller, there's a few scenes he really has to. The character is important to the body of the episode. Kate Winslet is layered in throughout, and that's some nice funny bits there. Yeah, Patrick Stewart is basically just in one scene, but it's a nice scene.
Well, Patrick Stewart, I mean, we'll get, because this is our episode, but Patrick Stewart, at the end of the episode, there's a scene where Andy Millman plays a voicemail from Patrick Stewart. It's like, did they add that later after he'd gone home and they couldn't? They had to just get him to record it on sound because it just seemed pretty egregious that they could only do it by voice.
But you understand why they can only get the person for one day or whatever.
Of course.
But then you've got Les Dennis,
Ross Kemp, and Les Dennis, who are there's a lot of pathos in those episodes. That is the idea of celebrity eating itself. Celebrity, these guys who are a victim of their own image and just trying to see the person underneath them. And those 2 episodes, I think, are the stronger episodes. They're different and they work better, I think.
Yeah, I agree. And if we try and get into the minds of Merchant and Gervais in terms of where they were coming from, obviously they had this huge success. They'd spent a lot of time on film sets by this point. And so they'd gone, the world of extras, the world of the supporting artists. It's a kooky place. It's some kind of weird and wonderful characters. There's a lot of material there. And this is for the second series, but they know what it's like to have sudden celebrity thrust upon you and that sort of thing. So they obviously wanted to explore that. And I think in the first series, you're exploring that with the likes of Les Dennis. He's had success, and now what is he kind of idea? But let's concentrate on the first series. I have a bit of a personal stake in this. I've done a lot of work as an extra.
Yeah, I'm curious to know your take on how, because a running theme throughout this is how the extras themselves are just treated like cattle, and they're not allowed on the same bus as the real actors, and they're sort of moved around like chess pieces on a board, and it's almost like they're treated like livestock. Is that overplayed, or is it literally that like that?
I made some notes, actually, as I went through. I'm going to write down the things that really kind of like, oh my God, yeah, that's true. They've got that.
Yeah.
So just to give a bit of context, I'm an actor. Well, obviously, I'm an Andy Millman level actor. I'm a struggling actor. No one's ever heard of me. And I do extra work because it's a good way to pay the bills. And here's the first crucial difference. And here's something, if you're an actor out there, that you need to know. Yeah. Doing extra work is nothing to do with acting. It has no connection to acting at all. If you want to be an actor and you think doing extra work is going to help you in any way, you are incorrect. Right. Absolutely incorrect. What's more, you kind of get looked down upon for doing it because there are lots of people who think doing extra work means they're an actor, and it's like they're shunned because they don't know what they're talking about. For me personally, it's just a great way to make a bit of money with a flexible schedule and keeps me available. I'd prefer to do that than work 3 days in a cafe. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So for me, it works fine, but it has nothing to do with acting. You don't have to do any acting unless you think walking across a room is acting, although you would be surprised some people aren't very good at that. The one thing that rang true, though, was there are people who do extra work and think that is a way to get into acting.
Yes.
However, they don't usually have the self-awareness of an Andy Millman, who really does seem to know kind of where he is in his career. But okay, so here's some things that kind of rang true for me. Yeah, there's a bus for the extras. There's a bus for other people, and you do not mix. I mean, the actors generally have their own trailers and stuff like that. But yeah, that kind of thing. Being treated like your cattle, yes, definitely, especially if you're in a huge crowd scene of like 200 people, because you have to move a bunch of people into a place and none of them are listening to you. And so they have to treat you like cattle. It's the only way to make it work.
But what about there's a scene where Ricky Gervais is in the background and he sort of moves into shot slightly so that he can, he'll be on screen. As the director calls cut, and as Ricky Gervais is walking away, the director says something like, "Can we cut that fat bloke out?" Like, just really, really disrespectful. And that was like, oh, come on, just a human being is not going to do that.
Yeah, not really. I mean, okay, so first of all, yes, there are people who desperately want to get their face in screen.
Oh, that bit I didn't doubt.
Yeah, personally, I'm get to the back as far away as possible because you earn the same regardless, and you can do a lot less at the back. But like I understand it if you just like, oh, I get to see myself when the film comes out. I get it. If you're an actor and you think that means something, then you
Sure.
have no idea like what an acting career is. That's my first kind of problem with Andy Millman. I think it's just a complete mistake in that character that he thinks this is acting. But we'll get into that. We'll get into that character a lot more because I think there's a lot of things about Andy Millman that displays he does not know what he's doing as an actor.
Yes.
And about his career.
Well, I think that this idea of treating them like cattle, it reaches its peak in the final, the Christmas special, where Maggie she's playing a prostitute opposite Clive Owen. And they're basically talking about how ugly she is, and Clive Owen's saying, "Look at the state of her. I wouldn't pay for that." And it's like so many things. It's like they've got this joke, and Ricky Gervais has really wound it up. And this is really funny. Let's do more of it. Come on, keep writing. It's feeling really awkward now. Let's keep on it. And it just feels like, oh God, this is too much now.
Yeah, it feels like a passing comment about someone is kind of more realistic.
Yeah, and it stretches it beyond the realms of realism.
Yeah, but I mean, there's some truth to that in the sense of people don't look at you as you're a human. So, for example, when the costume people are coming to check, they're looking at you, but they're kind of looking through you. They're not looking at you as a person. They're looking at you as a prop that is holding the costume. Yeah. The hair and makeup come, and they're not looking at you. They're looking at your hair. It's that sort of thing. Yeah. You'll be lined up, and people will come and go, no, I don't like this. Get rid of that. And it's like they'll be talking about costume or whatever. But there is a lot of loss of humanity about it. And you just kind of get used to that. And you don't take it personally because they're not.
I think that would wind me up.
Well, that's the other thing, okay? This is specifically about Andy Millman.
Yes.
To do extra work long term, you have to have a very specific personality. You have to be patient, and you have to be very tolerant, and you have to understand and be empathetic to other people. Because... the people who look after the extras are the crowd third ADs, right?
Yeah.
And they are basically the absolute lowest of the low in the crew. And if the crowd aren't where they're supposed to be when they're expected, they're the one who gets shouted at. And they're 23, just out of uni, and they're desperate to try and keep, impress. And that translates in lots of different ways. And you will get some young third ADs who kind of get a little bit angry and start shouting at people, and that is not a good way to deal with people. So you always think they're not going to last. Personally, I don't care. I'm a prop that moves. I'm a prop that has to be fed, and that's annoying to them. But I understand it. I'm a prop, and you're paying me to be a prop. That's okay. So that was another thing that really rang true, though. Extras who just moan all the time. And that is what Andy Millman does. Extras who moan and who push back and kind of give a bit of stick to the AD who are just trying to do their job. And that's what Andy Millman is. And Andy Millman would not last as long as he did in the extras game. Not because people would go, right, we're not working with him again. Although, yes, that would work. That would happen. But just because he would go, I can't do this. This is too annoying. I'm going to have to do something else.
Okay, I accept that. But the whole premise of extras from the first episode to the end of the Christmas special is the humiliation of Andy Millman. The realization that his principles are worthless. That his image of himself is always sacrificed to the next step on the ladder.
Maybe, but I think his image of himself is totally wrong. He doesn't know what he's doing. He doesn't know the world he's in. And through, I guess, luck, he keeps moving up the ladder.
Well, here's a question for you, Alan. So I said, I wanted to ask you about what the real experience of being an extra was like, and you've given us some good insight there. My question is, what the hell does Ricky Gervais know about being an extra? Like, how did he research this? How did they figure that out?
Yeah, I think that's a good question, actually, because I heard Stephen Merchant once telling a story. He was shooting a pilot for something, and he got talking to one of the extras, and he was basically saying, like, oh, God, this weird guy, and he was telling stories about this kind of kooky extra. So that was obviously laying a seed. He's just talked to someone who's, this is the world of extras is kind of weird people. And that's definitely true. There are some very weird people. I'll tell you why. Because it's the sort of job that is done by people who don't have a real job.
Yes.
Now, that can translate to many things. Because it's just kind of odd days here and there, it's sporadic, things get cancelled very last minute, you can't work it around a regular kind of 9-to-5 job. So the sort of people who do it are, actors. I meet a lot of artists, dancers, singers, people who are just making a bit of money on the side while they're pursuing a career in something else. There's retired people who are just doing it here and there when they get extra money, gets them out of the house. And then there are people who just can't hold down a job and are weird. And there's quite a lot of those people. That's one that comes through when there's an episode where he has to deal with the character played by Steve Spears.
Yes.
That's the one where they really kind of go like, on a set when you're dealing with other extras, be careful who you talk to because some of them are weird.
Right, that's interesting. That's the Sam Jackson episode. And that's interesting because, as we said, with Sam Jackson, he's really only in one scene. And so that episode really would be better titled the Steve Spears episode because that's the meat of the plot. And yeah, he's just a boring bloke. And there are some excruciating scenes as, Andy Millman tries to get away from him and he fails and he ends up, it's your classic Gervais comedy of embarrassment.
Yeah.
Do you know what my biggest problem with that episode was? I really like Steve Spears. I think he's a really good actor. And the premise of the episode is he's this really boring guy who you're desperate to get away from. But I think he's quite charismatic. I just liked him too much.
Yeah, I know what you mean, yeah. But I quite like that.
But your take on that is interesting. So my take was he's a boring guy. Your take is he's a weirdo.
Yeah. Obviously just casting people aside as weirdos is, obviously a bit unfair. But there's a lot of people where you go, okay, I see why you haven't got a job.
Well, so here's a question, bringing it back to our main cast. Is that what Maggie is? Because if Andy Millman wants to be an actor, he's an actor who's doing extra work. We never really know what Maggie's doing. She's basically what you've just described. Lost.
Yes, and frankly, I think that's one of the biggest failings with the Maggie character, particularly when we get into the second series and try and develop that a little bit. We never know what she is, what she wants.
No, there's nothing.
Yeah, ultimately, she is a little bit of a weirdo, but because she comes across as quite a nice, normal person, if a little bit ditzy, you don't understand why. Like, why did you never find a career that you wanted to do? And and there's loads of reasons why that might be. But we never question that. We never really get into that. And as a woman in your mid-30s, there's all sorts of questions that society is asking of you. So even if as a writer you decide that the character isn't interested in those things, you kind of have to acknowledge that. And she's obviously on the hunt for a man all the time. That's kind of one of the.
And we get a scene where there's a voicemail from her parents, sort of asking what she's up to, that kind of thing.
Well, that's in this episode. I'll get to that later because that's. It just kind of comes out of nowhere.
But the problem with Maggie is that she's so sweet and charming. She's just lovely. She's really lovely. Yeah. She's the heart of this program.
Definitely Ashley Jensen is the secret weapon of extras.
Definitely,
yeah. And just to contrast that, what my big takeaway from this, watching this again. So I haven't watched this for years. I haven't watched this actually since before I started doing extra work. So that was a nice, interesting kind of extra element for me.
That's good. Yeah.
But I remember really enjoying it. It's funny. Yeah, I like Ricky Gervais. I like Stephen Merchant stuff, right? Having watched this again now, maybe 10 years later, the one thing I took away from this, the really big thing I took away was, wow, Andy Millman is a total dickhead. I don't like him at all.
Yeah.
And for some reason, I got the impression that that's not really deliberate from the writers. He's not written to be an unlikable character. Obviously, he has those traits, but I think ultimately we're supposed to be on board with him, right?
I don't know. I agree with you. I think he's horrible. He's nasty and cynical and manipulative. And the contrast with Maggie, she's innocent and credulous, and she sometimes puts her foot in it and says the wrong thing or reveals too much, and drops Andy in it. But he always deserves it. All she's done is tell the truth that he is, he said this horrible thing. So it sort of turns out that she's somehow sabotaging him, but she's not. He's sabotaging himself. He's horrible.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that they do use that a lot, where he says something to her, not necessarily in confidence, but that most people would understand. You don't go spreading that around. And then she just goes and tells everyone in an innocent way.
Because she's innocent and credulous and sweet.
Yeah.
I think I'm in love with Ashley Johnson.
Yeah, fair enough. But that's also again, because she comes across so sweet, you think, well, why is she struggling to find a man? Although she doesn't struggle to find men interested in her.
No.
And then we see her go on a date and something goes wrong.
Yeah.
But it's always like it's never anything that major. You know what I mean? It's like not her fault necessarily. It always just like, well, it has to go wrong because that's what's funny. But we haven't quite figured out how to make that work.
Yeah.
It's not inconsistency to the character, but it's just a sort of lack of depth. I think what Andy Millman does, and perhaps this could relate back to Ricky Gervais in some way, but I think what Andy Millman does is surround himself with people who he can look down on so that he feels better about himself.
Yeah.
So Maggie he's always in control of that situation because he's cleverer than her and he can talk around her and make her laugh and kind of that makes him happy. And I'm saying that in kind of a negative way, but that's fine. You know, I understand that. And then his agent as well, who is the most useless, ridiculous, like comedically bad agent. But just to relating to that, I think the reason Andy sticks with him and keeps him around is because he knows he's better than him and it makes him feel better about himself.
Yeah. And when he gets, in the Christmas special, when he gets a more competent agent, the more competent agent tells him the hard truths that he doesn't want to hear.
Yeah, and kind of treats him as not his most important client because he's not.
Yeah. All right. Well, we'll come back to Merchant's performance there. That's certainly interesting.
Well, I tell you what, we're sort of dallying around. Let's actually jump into our episode because, you know, we haven't been that specific.
Let's
about
do that,
it yet,
yes.
We're
going around all over the place here, which is our way. But yes, let's open our episode. So we open with Patrick Stewart. So most of the episodes open with the celebrity doing their thing on camera that they are, the Andy Millman is extra.
The film within the film, yeah.
Yeah. So we have Patrick Stewart, who's he's doing his best shit. He's doing his Prospero. He's doing, isn't it?
Is it? Yeah.
So he's emoting and doing this great Shakespearean speech. Meanwhile, we have Maggie and Andy who are sort of sitting behind the scenes watching, and rather than being awed by this great Shakespearean actor, Maggie asks one of her classic "Would you rather" questions. And you know, which is a sort of great little insight into their mentality.
So yeah, we have one of our regular characters here in this scene in Greg, who is a fellow extra.
Well, he's a fellow extra who is also an actor, a bit like Andy Millman, and he's a classic sitcom nemesis. He always sort of appears at the most embarrassing moments for Millman. And what I think is curious about Greg is that throughout his career develops throughout this.
Yeah,
he's always one step ahead of Ricky Gervais, and I think that works really well.
Well, yeah, I think obviously that's the whole point. You know, no matter how successful Andy Millman is, this guy's just one step ahead. But also, it's not just a one step ahead, but Greg ends up with the career that Andy Millman dreams of. Andy Millman, although he has got success, has come at a price that he is ultimately not willing to pay.
Yeah.
Sean Pye, who plays Greg, the perfect level of smugness.
I think this character is excellent. He sort of pops up. I don't know if he's in every episode, he's in most episodes, but only ever for one scene.
Yeah, they don't overuse it.
He's just,
it's nice.
Every single moment that Andy Millman is humiliated in some way, Greg's just there looking, watching. And it's almost like he's playing the part of Andy Millman's conscience, just dragging him back down and saying, "You failed. You are not the success you thought you were."
Yeah. But with a smug look on his face.
Yeah, and you can kind of imagine if Ricky Gervais's own conscience was personified, it would be smug.
So Sean Pye there, who plays
who is Sean Pye? I don't know. I've not seen him in anything else.
Not really an actor. He's done the odd bits and pieces, but he's a writer, and he wrote on the 11 o'clock show. So I think they must know him kind of from there. But he co-created Monkey Dust, which was like an animated sketch show that was on. BBC.
I remember Monkey Dust. Monkey Dust was great.
He did a sitcom called Respectable, which did one series on Channel 5. Channel 5 sitcom, who knew?
Remember them?
And he also co-created The Increasingly Poor Decisions of Todd Margaret with David Cross.
Do you know what? I tried an episode of that and really disliked it. Never went back to it.
David Cross in Britain with Neil out of the in-between.
Neil, yeah, that's right.
And I think what Gervais and Merchant do like to do is bring in kind of new actors or, you know, people who are not that well known, and because there's a lot of improv and just playing around on their sets, I think it does work towards people who aren't necessarily that sort of I'm an actor and this is what they want, kind of funny people, really, comedians and a more naturalistic style.
So back to our episode, and just before we move off that scene, can we just talk about the discussion that they have with Greg? Because it's an example of Maggie undermining Andy. So Andy's trying to be the great big I am around Greg, and she completely undermines him by telling him that his first girlfriend looked like Ronnie Corbett.
Yeah,
and his response is, "And it's a good night from me." Which I think was the funniest line in the show.
This is the other thing about Andy Millman, that it's like, and you got to remember this was made in 2006, okay? And we'll see a bit more of this when we get to the gay panic later on, but how quickly things change. So this is just 15 years old, but already you think, wow, that's aged quite badly. And there's just other things that the Andy Millman character sort of says, where he kind of goes, "Oh, no, I get birds all the time." He's just like desperately this kind of, "Oh, I need to protect my masculinity" kind of thing, which is very 90s, I think. But for a man of Andy Millman's age in 2006, it makes sense. So I'm not saying he shouldn't be doing that, but just using a word like birds, for example, is so 90s. But there's elements like that, which again, you just think, he's kind of just pathetic, isn't he, Andy Millman? Like he is.
Oh, he's pathetic.
And we never really dig down into why has he had so much trouble with women then in his past, clearly. Why does he struggle with relationships? Oh, it's because he's a dick. It's because he's quite unpleasant to everyone around him.
He's horrible. So what's the next scene then? The next scene is Patrick Stewart's trailer.
Yes, so we see Andy Millman, who is an extra, just wander into Patrick Stewart's trailer, and they do acknowledge this in the dialogue. He walks in and goes, "You know what? I'm probably going to get fired for this, but..." And yes, let's talk about being extra. Yes, you would get fired for that. Absolutely, you would just get thrown off set immediately.
This prop's broken.
Yes. I was going to say it's an unwritten rule, but I think it's very much written down somewhere. You don't talk to the talent, and this is something that really does not ring true about extras. There is really very, very, very little communication between extras and the talent, the real actors. Like even just where, Kate Winslet wanders over, she's getting a cup of tea and she just chats to them, which I'm sure Kate Winslet is a lovely person and might just chat to people. But that doesn't happen. First of all, the extras are held somewhere else. They have their own tea station, if at all.
In a pen.
The actors get a different... the actors have someone bring tea to them, actually, is what happens. But, they go to a different place. The crew have craft services. They have a different section they go to for food. But also, as an actor, even if you're a very nice person, you're happy to talk to people, if you talk to one person, then everyone was going to talk to you. And you've got a job of work to do. You've got to be thinking about what the hell you're doing. You're probably thinking about your lines.
You've got to be pretending that acting's a serious craft, don't you?
Exactly, yes.
So this scene in Patrick Stewart's trailer, where Patrick Stewart, unlikely as it is, hears him out and listens to his script idea. But then this is the scene where Patrick Stewart's sending himself up, and I think that Kate Winslet and Patrick Stewart are the two cameos, I think probably in the whole thing, where they are clearly having a great time and really enjoying themselves. Patrick Stewart's talking about his script idea and how he's got the power to make women's clothes fall off, and she's scrabbling around trying to find her clothes, but of course by then I've seen everything. I've seen it all.
Brilliant, great performance.
Really funny.
What a fantastic performance! He plays it so straight. He's got this
completely
little smirk
straight
on his face.
Absolutely no wink to camera. It's a beautiful acting performance. He's really doing good pretending.
So this is another thing which I think is not particularly good writing of this sitcom. Andy Millman is an actor, and we see that he's a struggling actor. He's not got very far in his career. Give me one point in the 5 episodes before this that he mentions he's a writer, or wants to write, or is interested in trying to create his own material.
That's a fair point. Yeah. You see, I hadn't thought about that, because in my head, Andy Millman is just Ricky Gervais. So I know Ricky Gervais is a writer, but that is a really good point. Dramatically speaking, it's out of the blue.
Yeah, it's come out of nowhere. And, actors often are trying to make their own material, but let's at least have a mention of that. And this is another thing. Again, Andy Millman doesn't know what being an actor is, and I suspect Ricky Gervais and Stephen Merchant don't know that either, or at least didn't know at this point. They don't know what it's like to be an actor who's scrabbling around trying to find a job.
No, because
they got into acting through writing. That's why they think that's the way you do it.
Yeah.
And this is one thing that really doesn't ring true throughout the whole series. In the first series, Andy Millman is a nobody actor with a nobody agent. As far as we can tell, has no experience as a professional actor whatsoever. He thinks being an extra is being an actor, so he obviously doesn't know what he's talking about. And then when a job comes up doing panto with Les Dennis of all people, this is not some small-scale panto. This is obviously a big job, playing a major, major role in a panto. And he's like, no, I don't want to do that. Well, what are you doing then as an actor? What is this?
He's waiting for the De Niro call.
Yeah, he just doesn't know what he's doing. But I don't think it's presented as this character doesn't know what they're doing and we're laughing at them. I think it's just that Gervais and Merchant think, oh, well, if you do that kind of acting, that's pathetic.
Well, but that's because, Gervais and Merchant, whether they deserved it or not, they got a lucky break and a huge success the first time out. I think they would understand on a conscious level that that's not normal, but nevertheless, that is a route in.
But it's that's what really annoyed me from my own point of view in the first series, particularly, of that struggling actor mentality. I mean, you don't really say no to anything. Even if you're not bothered about the money and you think, well, I don't want to do adverts, it's just a good, solid professional credit that then kind of goes on your CV and people go, okay, well, this person gets work, so let's get them in.
Yeah, and Andy Millman wouldn't do that. He would just say, that's beneath me, I'm not doing it.
But even when he's an established actor and he becomes an overnight star, he's then like, oh, well, I'm not doing a bit part in Doctor Who. Like, well, why not? Who do you think you are? Like, what do you think you are? Like, it doesn't, and that it's frustrating throughout the whole thing because I just don't know what he thinks he is. Like,
he thinks he's Ricky Gervais. He thinks he's Chris Rock's best mate.
So we never see Andy Millman. We very, very rarely ever see him laugh or really, he makes a couple of jokes with Maggie, but he's a very miserable, dour person, except when he's with Jonathan Ross in the second series. And
that's right, yes.
And he's just Ricky Gervais. Ricky Gervais is doing a scene with Jonathan Ross and is not acting,
right.
Forgot to act, forgot he's supposed to be a character and is just being
I
Ricky
had that
Gervais.
note too, yeah.
And there's things like that in the second series where it's just like we start to lose track of what it is. And if you were really playing that, like Andy Millman likes Jonathan Ross so much that he kind of comes out of his shell and is a new person, all this, that would be one thing, but it's not. And in fact, by the end, the kind of point of that episode is like, oh no, you know what? I need to forgo Jonathan Ross because I need to get back to my real friend, Maggie, in which I can go and be miserable with her. Yeah. All these elements. And I think the second series gets worse for that because they've got this whole ongoing story. The sitcom is no longer episodic. It is just a 3-hour long kind of journey of this character. But the journey is staccato. It's just moments. It's just, here's... I've done this wrong, and here's the resolution of that. Yeah,
I think so. And I was watching the Christmas special, I've written down unearned pathos, and it just feels like, okay, we need to do something sad now. Let's put the sad bit in here.
I think that is a summation of extras. Is it's unearned. Most of the emotional beats are unearned. Whereas actually, to contrast that, the Les Dennis arc in that episode, great. We see the journey.
Really good.
Why can't we do that more? Why can't we do that with Andy Millman over a longer period? What we get here in this episode is essentially a warm-up for Series 2. He has a bit of success. It gets threatened. He does something wrong. He falls out with Maggie. Big gesture at the end to win it back, like a Richard Curtis film. Yeah. And that's it. It's very basic.
Yeah. Let's go back to our episode. So now we've got a nice introduction to Darren the agent and Barry, of course. So the next scene is in Darren's office, and obviously, the joke throughout is that he's completely incompetent as an agent. Every scene he's in, he starts off with this bravado, and Andy Millman calls him out, and he just crumbles. And you've sort of got Barry in the background. In this scene, he's licking envelopes. He's just doing menial work, whatever it is, the most degrading thing that they can think of.
And there's nice detail. So, for example, Barry is sat on like a stool thing. It's like, the thing you use to get up to a high shelf. It's not a proper chair, basically, is the point.
He hasn't got a desk. He's just got the envelopes on his knee. yeah.
So, okay, shall we talk about these characters before we get into the scene?
Yeah, let's.
How they're established. Stephen Merchant playing Darren Lamb, the agent. Now, Stephen Merchant obviously has done quite a lot of acting these days. This was still pretty early on. He has a cameo in The Office, but it is a cameo. And Stephen Merchant's acting style is not The Office. It's not kind of realistic.
Are you saying his acting style, or is that just this character?
Well, I've seen him do other things. This is fine. This is a sitcom character, and he's doing sitcom acting, and that's fine. But it's not this sitcom, is it? These two characters are the broadest elements of all this. Then you could, for example, throw in some of the other guests, like Keith Chegwin. I think comes over very kind of a little bit more broad, but even that he's playing it quite naturalistically. But the Darren Lamb and Barry dynamic is completely at odds with the rest of the show. Yeah, and to be frank, I probably find it the funniest bits.
yeah, it's great. It's a nice bit of fresh air. It's a nice bit of humour in amongst the bleakness.
But I think in the second series, and again, I think they lose their way a little bit. They beef up those characters. They bring them in more and more, and I think that's not a good idea. We start getting their own little storylines, things going on that they're doing that are separate from Andy, and that's kind of it starts to disperse the story too much, and I think that's a mistake. But it's obviously like we enjoy playing these characters, we enjoy writing these characters, so let's just put more in.
But that's an interesting right thing to do. So now I'm thinking about Afterlife. My problem with Afterlife, one of my problems with Afterlife, is that it feels like every week's episode is a tour. So we've got these characters over there doing that. We've got these characters over here. They're doing their thing. And we just go and see those. No, okay, let's go over to the cemetery and see Penelope Wilton and see what she's saying this week. And these different groups of characters never interact with each other. It's like a soap opera where you see what these guys are doing in the house. Who's in the pub tonight? And what you just described there is an early example of that, I think, where you've got these two characters. In the first series, yes, they only exist to interact with Andy, but then it's almost like they've got their own little spin-off within the episodes.
Yeah, and let's be clear. So certainly in the first series, our characters are Andy and Maggie. Those are the people that we care about, any emotional journey they're going on. And if we have scenes with Maggie on her own, that's fine. Darren, the Lamb, and Barry from EastEnders, and indeed all the celebrity guests are there to fuel those stories. They're there to inform those stories.
Yes.
They don't have their own bit. Even if Les Dennis has his whole character arc, what we're really seeing is how that affects Andy. We're seeing it through Andy's eyes. And the point of that is that he's like, oh God, I found out his girlfriend's cheating on him. Should I tell him? We lose that in the second series because we start to see kind of other things going on. It just becomes fractured and disparate and not as funny as well, which is the important thing, I think.
Yeah.
And that's all we've got time for this week. Do come back next time when we will be continuing this discussion and looking at some other elements of extras such as the other actors, Ashley Ensign and Barry from EastEnders. And of course we'll be going further into what happened in Series 2 and the changes they made. In the meantime, you can visit our social media, Instagram and Twitter. We are at BritcomPod. Go and join the conversation there. Thank you very much again, and we will see you next time.